So Dr. Geisler is here today in a marathon of meetings.
I started at 8 this morning.
Poor woman who's been in back-to-back meetings all day. But we invited her as part of Women in Academic Medicine because not only does she have a long history of leading multidisciplinary faculty and a love for faculty development, but she has a particular interest in developing women faculty and has done a number of studies and has led a number of initiatives around particularly helping women, especially at the associate level, but also I think a lot of the lessons apply to assistant level and up. And so as part of WIM, we were very happy to have Cheryl agree to give us some of her insights about women in the Professoriate. So
I didn't really prepare a formal talk. I have a sort of set of points that I want to kind of put on the table, things I've been thinking about over the last few months, and then I'm hoping we can kind of have a discussion and talk about these things. So one of the I always begin to think about the state of women's advancement in the context of my understanding of the university as a whole and the notion and the professoriate. So the university is a kind of a strange creature, and I think it's pretty. If you haven't thought about this before, I think it's not so hard to grasp. We have a kind of collegiate professional model where peer review is the main mechanism of evaluation, and so it's very disciplinary based. It's not really local, it's national or international. So you have this kind of disciplinary structure wedded to or melded onto a kind of hierarchical organization of evaluation where, you go from faculty member to department head to dean to provost and so on, and that controls the promotion and tenure. But the promotion and tenure process relies on that collegiate network for the letters of review. So they kind of intersect and meld in interesting ways. So it is a self-regulating profession, but not entirely self-regulating because there's this hierarchical structure that brings more than peer review to the process. So it's kind of complex that way. And I've said more than once today that I think the ideal is for career, if you will, or advancement, is that what is good for the individual faculty member has aligns with what's good for the discipline advancement, and that aligns with what's good for the university or departmental advancement, your institutional home advancement. And that's very, very much an ideal that often gets honored in the breach. And many women in particular faculty feel that what's in their best interest is not in the best interest of the university and sometimes not in the best interest of the discipline. And so these things get out of alignment. But nevertheless, I think that is the ideal. In fact, I think the professoriate is a very high stress profession. And I've done research with colleagues that was published in Science about retention patterns, and some of you have already heard this. If you look at who's hired in any given year in faculty lines, in 10.9 years, 50% of them will be gone. Some of them will have left the professoriate entirely. Some of them will go to other institutions, either up or down or sideways, depending on the situation. But there is, at best, and this is a very stable pattern, this isn't a recent pattern, at best it's a pretty high turnover, profession. And I think the College of Medicine is higher, for those of you who are here for College of Medicine. So the faculty retention patterns create a high stress profession, and I think there's a double face to accountability that our colleagues who work in corporations or in the business world don't face, because when they go in and get asked to do things, if they do things, then they get promoted. when we go into our jobs and we get asked to do things, as I said one time this morning, and I realized when I was an assistant, we get fired in 6 years. We don't make tenure if we do what we're asked to do, because no one asks us to do on any kind of routine basis the research and the intellectual work that will get us promoted. And so I think that's very different. You have to realize that's quite a different professional structure. And it does mean that succeeding in the professoriate is a different kind of game, if you will. I don't think it's really a game, but it's not what your colleagues outside of the university face. It's different. And some of the strategies that I've spent all day talking about arise out of that difference in accountability, that you have to create your own accountability networks some other way than relying on the workplace to structure that accountability for you, so that you do the important work that you want to do. Layered on top of that, and I have thought a lot in the last few months about how the university is changing, and over the last 5 years, there's been really a lot of stress put on the university as a institution. There's a lot of doubt in the public mind about the value of the university as a public institution, and therefore a lot of less financial support for universities as public institutions. There is also, and I think going along with that, a change in the university, the structure, the complement of the faculty, so that the tenure line faculty is no longer the majority. Staffing structure for the American university. I thought it was about 50% non-tenure line, but I saw an article just yesterday that said 75%, and I think that's too high. But somewhere between 50 and 75% of university faculty are not the classic tenure line faculty, and that I think is exacerbated by, well, first of all, the professoriate is aging, and when those people retire, they're not going to be replaced by and large by tenure line faculty. So I was telling my colleague at the last conference because I sort of woke up to this and said, this way of life is going to become very uncommon. This this kind of melding of teaching and research that I've come to think of as the kind of life that I signed up for, and I don't think I think it's going to become more like in Europe, where it's only a few people get to have that kind of life. So that's all about the academy. Then we get to the question of women. Where do women in the academy come in? Many of you have heard that metaphor of the pipeline leakage. Have you, or should I talk about that? Some of you have. So this really comes out of an analysis of women in the STEM disciplines, in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and that's where I've done most of my work. That's where a lot of the work in the States has happened on women. And so, if you look at the production of PhDs over the last 50 years, I mean, women almost every 50 years, probably even 25 years ago, didn't get very many PhDs. The PhD production was predominantly male. Now it's actually tipped overall, and I think definitely in some professions, to be predominantly female. So that part of the pipeline women in that part of the pipeline have increased, but the number of women as assistant professors constricts, the number at associate professor constricts, and then a very, very small, only 20% of the full professors in the United States are women. So that's a kind of leaky pipeline where they talk about, there's leakage out of each stage career transition, that more women drop out at each stage, so that it's finally very, very rare to see women in the full professor ranks. Now, I actually think that's changing. Maybe I'll come back and talk a little bit about it. one of the first studies that I did of this was done at my home institution at that time, Rensselaer Polytechnic, and we coined the term of 13 plus club. And that is the group of people that have 13 or more years since their terminal degree, usually the PhD. And this is the group of people that conceivably could be full professor, because 6 years to tenure, and then another 6 years more or less in rank as associate, and then you could become up for full. That's kind of the process. It's not true in every institution, but when you look at people who are 13 or more years since dissertation, you say they might be full professor. Before that, probably not going to be full professors. And so there's a real discrepancy in the 13 plus club in the number of women, percentage of women that make it. So it's, as I said, it's 2.2 times more likely for men to be promoted when they're 13 in that club than for women. And so now I guess there's a lot of emphasis on on assistant professor, the entry level ranks, PhD recruitment and recruitment at the assistant professor ranks. And one of the things that we did when we got National Science Foundation funding to work on institutional change in women's advancement is we decided to focus on the full professor ranks. And we did that because full professors are the decision makers at the university. That they are the ones that sit on the promotion and tenure committees. They are the ones that are eligible for the endowed professorships. They are the ones that are the grown-ups, if you will, for the institution. And so if you don't see women in those discussions, then they are not going to be. There's a sort of tipping point about gender percentage. If they're in the discussions, then the discussion and evaluation is fairer of the ranks below. But if they're not there, if the senior women are not there, then it's not fair, and it's systemically not fair. So I think it is really important to pay attention to the percentage of women at the senior ranks, and not just think, okay, well, let's take care of the lower, let's just get people hired and tenured and worry about the promotion to full later. Another thing that impacts the state of women in the professoriate is disciplinary distribution. And I don't know how many of you saw the research that just came out, I think this week, about the genius complex, or did anybody read that? Yeah. So women in fields that perceived themselves to be, that you needed to be a genius in order to succeed in those fields. And these are fields like physics, and what were some of the physics, economics, what's the third one? Philosophy, that was it, philosophy. So that you would become a really good philosopher, a really good physicist because you were a genius. That if they had that kind of milieu in the discipline, they were unfriendly to women. It was strictly correlated. So now, I suppose we could have a discussion about whether you really need to be a genius in philosophy to be a genius, but I don't think so. But you do get uneven disciplinary distributions. When we did the study that was published in Science on the retention of faculty in rank after hiring, we found no gender effects except in mathematics, where there were huge gender effects, where women were leaving earlier and they were being promoted later. And so you do have different patterns. And they're also increasing numbers, increasingly obvious as women hold more PhDs, that they tend to come into certain fields and not others. So still remains that philosophy has almost no. Now, that's not economics. If you have a PhD in philosophy, you're not doing it because you're going to make money on it. All right, so it's not like, oh, they're smarter, so they go for the fields that make money. That's not the case. The fact is that, there are certain fields that have a kind of perceived hostility to women. And so that's still a fact of the university, and some fields don't. And so sometimes some people have claimed that some fields, some disciplines are becoming ghettoized because women are becoming predominant in that. And that's part of the dynamics of the state of women. So I said I had some reservations about thinking about the stability of the pattern at the associate professor rank, and I do think things are changing. At least there's some evidence of that. When we did a study of 3,000 faculty recruited and retained in the science and disciplines, and we did find that there were not gender differences except in a couple of fields. And I think we started with cohorts hired in 2007, and I think if we'd gone back 10 years and started with cohorts in 97, we definitely would have found gender differences in retention patterns. I also did an analysis of the promotion patterns in my own professional organization, which is Rhetoric, and I looked at it by cohort, and I did find that for people in the 13 plus club who were 25 years plus, not just 13 years, that there were definitely gender differences between men and women's promotion patterns. But in those who were newly 13 plus club, there were no differences in terms of promotion rates. So it did, in fact, there was a little bit of an edge for the women, which I haven't explained. So I do think that there's some evidence that things are getting better in terms of advancement of women in the professoriate. On the other hand, if we just relied on normal mechanisms like I'm talking about, we predicted in that Science article that it would be 100 years before we reached parity and representation across the ranks. So it's a slow process. So I thought I'd maybe just kind of classify the kinds of problems that I think women face, the kind of underlying dynamics that lead to this sort of state of the professoriate. And I think they come in three categories. One are unconscious bias factors. And that is, while I have met some people that are overtly evil in intention, and behavior, I have met very few of those people. And I think that most of the dynamics that come out of unconscious bias, that people behave the way they do, and it's not just men. Women are unconsciously biased against women as well, all the studies show. And this affects hiring rates. Women are hired less often because there's an unconscious bias towards hiring people like you, or like, there have been, some of you have seen the studies where, they say, they take the same profile and call it Sally, and it's the same person, and they always hire the man and they don't hire the woman. And those are kind of not real life, but in the lab. It affects resource allocation, and some of the work that I started doing was all precipitated by an analysis that came out of MIT. So that would have been in 2000 maybe, where they documented that women had smaller lab space, had worse course loads, and it was a very systematic documentation of what to do. So resource allocation, your chair doesn't say, oh, you're a woman, I'm going to give you a smaller lab, but you can see the dynamics that might arise that might lead to that.
So how do you think you can create more consciousness about that? How can you change it?
Well, I think one of the things you do is just make sure that your department heads, your institutional leaders know about unconscious bias so that they can correct. Because it's not just men that do this to women, it's women who do this to women. And some of it is that we don't fight back as easily, or we have negative consequences for fighting back. And that's to my third point, third factor, which are gender roles. It's very, it's pretty well established that, there are certain expectations of the genders, and if we go against those expectations and we try to negotiate too hard, or we try to self-promote too broadly, that we get described as bitchy or, negatively reinforced. So it's very difficult for us to fight back and not be blamed for fighting back, whereas a man, who was assigned a certain lab space would be, seen as standing up for his rights to ask for more, and a woman would be just seen as a troublemaker. So gender roles and unconscious bias kind of reinforce each other that way. And we can talk about, what you can do about that, because we all face that, I think. And then the middle problem, I think, are family commitments. And I think this increases the time stress that many women face. The work-life balance is a big issue. And dual career is a big issue, although I haven't heard much discussion about that. But when you have, in the sciences, women scientists tend to marry other scientists, so, and I don't know what it's like in medicine, but, so then you have a dual career problem, and who, it's very, does the woman follow the man in that situation? Does she take the non-tenure line when the man takes the tenure line, or there are all those kinds of dynamics that come in. So I think those are three sort of categories of problems: unconscious bias, gender roles, and family commitments. So we have a state of the academy, then we have the state of women in the academy. And then the question is, which I spend a lot of time is thinking, well, what can individual women do? What can women do as a group? And what can the institution do in the face of those kinds of patterns? And I don't have, that's not the second page of my talk. That's what I wanted to generate some discussion about amongst the group of you here at 4:30. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say one of my roles is anytime there's a faculty search, one of the search committee members has to attend a hiring workshop, and we do discuss unconscious bias. That's kind of a large portion of that workshop, just to let people know the research evidence of its existence, how you can kind of use certain strategies to reduce its impact on evaluations and that sort of thing. So, but that doesn't really help once you get here. So as I mentioned in the last session, one of my goals this spring is to develop kind of a short presentation to deans and heads where I talk about what all the research shows about gender inequality in academia. So women tend to be assigned service more, that sort of thing. So just kind of giving them a short summary so that they're at least more conscious and aware that they might be, playing into these patterns, because as Cheryl mentioned, most people aren't doing this maliciously. These are unconscious biases. You can actually go test your own unconscious biases at the Harvard website if you want. I have done it before. And
you have unconscious bias?
Yes, I did my dissertation research on unconscious bias against women in STEM fields, and I have a slight negative bias against women in STEM fields, despite being very consciously committed to equity issues, and almost everyone displays at least some sort of bias. And one other kind of point, I don't want to dominate the discussion, but there's been some interesting research lately on kind of self-promotion, and the research was looking at citation patterns, and what they found is that men tend to cite other men, and they don't tend to cite...
And themselves.
Yes, there's a huge self-citation gap. So men are more likely to cite themselves than women are. And if, citation counts are being kind of increasingly used as an indicator of quality. So one way that you can kind of, do something that men are also doing is cite yourself. Like, you don't have to feel bad or think it's weird. It's, and when I look up research papers and that I think are really good, my first strategy to find other papers that are related is to go to the citation, like what they cited. So you can actually kind of create the snowball effect of increasing the visibility of your work by, engaging in the self-promotion. And given that men are more likely to cite other men, you might also kind of make it a strategy to try and cite other women. Sorry, that was long.
No, that's fine. That was good. Other thoughts? Yeah.
Question. So I kind of decided after years of worrying about being perceived as a bitch when I wanted to say what I thought, that maybe this year I'm going to just sort of embrace it and be like, if I am perceived as being a bitch, it means
Might as well be it.
speaking my mind and, rubbing a few people maybe the wrong way, but at least saying what I think is important. And I know I have like my inner counter. There are some days when I know, oh my gosh, that was really bitchy. There are other days when I might be perceived as such, and I know I'm just saying what everyone else would say if they were a man, not being perceived that way. So do you have any suggestions? Because this is sort of my plan for the year. So I'm just going to give it a go, see what happens. But I don't know. I won't know for a while until backlash or whatnot happens. But I think for a long time I've been afraid to speak.
I think this is really one of the most difficult issues for most of us. It's certainly a difficult issue for me because I think and this impacts on negotiation skills, right? Directly, but how do you? I mean, I know that I'm personally kind of a dominant person, right? I mean, if I don't rein myself in, I'll just talk too much and talk too loudly, and so I have that going for me. But I know I've been called bitchy in other conditions. So, and you can either go with it or trying to find a different path. The path that I've tried to find, which has more to do with negotiation than kind of talking in meetings. I'm not sure I've come to grips with that one yet, but I've had to negotiate a lot of things, is to try to ask for help, to try to decide, what I need. And instead of saying, give this to me, I need it, or demand it, I say, here's the situation, here's what I think, is what I need to succeed and help the university or, whatever organization, and say, can you help me to do this? So it's a more collaborative model. And in fact, if you read the book that I recommended in the last session, Just Ask For It, there's a kind of two models of negotiation. One is a collaborative model of negotiation, and one is a more adversarial model. And I think a lot of women, when they think negotiation, they think they have to be adversarial, and they do come across as really bitchy. But I think that the research is that everybody should be more collaborative. They would succeed better, not just women. And I think it's a model that fits us better. Now, Linda Babcock, who was one of the authors of that book, I had a chance to talk to her when I was at Carnegie Mellon in the fall. But I also heard a podcast, and she said, women are better at negotiating for other people than they are for themselves. And so whenever she's in negotiation, she thinks, well, what would be good for my dog? And if I give up on, and I've used that too, so, when I went to Vancouver, I asked for a salary that was, kind of commensurate with what I was making in New York, but Vancouver's like twice as expensive, so it was a pretty high salary. And I said, well, I said this, but I also thought this, if I take the salary they're offering me, my family's going to have a lower standard of living. And can I do that to them? And I didn't think I could do it without at least saying, look, this is what I need in order to make a lateral, a move. And I got it. So I think trying to find a way that you can speak to the person that you're talking to with great respect, and assuming that they are on your side and on the side of, whatever organizational framework you're in, and that you're sharing, what you have in that light. So if you want to say something that's, that nobody wants to say because it's so, everybody in the room knows something, but they don't say it because it's rude or, whatever. And then you can say something like, well, I don't know, how would you say it? Well, I've heard that people say this, or, we have to be, I'm a little concerned that we'll be perceived as this way, and how are we going to answer that? Now, some people would say, just be a bitch and do what they, take a kind of more male approach to the contribution and domination of the conversation. And, probably the truth is in the middle.
Well, I also think that what our perception of being a bitch is our perception of it. I think that speaking up and being true to yourself is important, and that it doesn't necessarily...
Oh, it's not just our perception. It's well documented that we're considered bitches.
And I don't agree.
But I think I am very outspoken, and I've always spoken my mind, and I know people probably perceive me as being a bitch from time to time, but I think it's incumbent upon us as women to normalize that it's perfectly fine for us to be as outspoken as our male counterparts. Doesn't mean that they're bastards and we're bitches all the time. It just means that we're outspoken people, and people may not like my style, but okay, that's who I am. And so I think
but that's fine if you're okay with it just being out there on the table. But if you want action on what you're saying, because you're obviously contributing something that you see from a different point of view, that from my past experience, that doesn't work. You can say it and they ignore it and they label you as a troublemaker or somebody who's not a collaborator, even though you may collaborate broadly outside your department and people love working with you. They don't want to hear it that way from you. And I've tried giving my message at various points in my career through other people, like finding that male colleague who can say what I want to be said because they'll listen to him. They won't listen to me, or finding an older person that they're already listening to, an older woman when I was younger, because I just tried everything. I tried whispering it, I tried writing it down, I tried shouting it. I mean, I tried everything. And what I find where I am now is they remove me rather than accepting it and switch me over and push me more out to my other collaborations.
Yeah. It's a difficult situation.
I can't speak to your particular situation, but what I'm saying is I think we need to start creating a culture shift whenever possible. So whenever you're in meetings where there are other women who are trying to say something, because I've been in a lot of meetings where I've said something and it's gone ignored, and then a male has said the same thing and they've gone, oh, what a great idea.
Yeah. Yep.
And so what I wish is when I hear that happening, that I would say, gee, I think Susan said that earlier, and I thought it was a great idea then, too. So I do think we need to do as much as we can. There's stuff we can't change, but things that we can, we should.
And we can educate our male colleagues about unconscious bias, because this is a kind of unconscious bias. And once some men, in a department or in a milieu know that this happens, I've seen men say, Susan said that, and that's a really good idea. So they know that it happens, and they can, it doesn't have to just be the women who look after it. It's for the well-being of the whole.
So service is an issue. I think women get assigned service more often, in part because we say yes, and then we're competent, right? And so I always feel like the reward for being competent is you get more service. Right, and so, but I just agreed to do something on Thursday, right, to rearrange my schedule because I was like, well, I can, and so I think that becomes a big issue for, I can look at our department, I can say the service bird, and I can look at someone else, and part of it is I look at this other woman in the department, I say, well, she does so much, how can I say no, right, but I don't look at the men and go, hey, but they don't do that much, right?
Yeah.
So, I don't know how you change that dynamic, right? Because again, I don't think the head is doing it because
they intend to do it.
These people are confident and will say yes. It's the path of least resistance to actually get it done.
Yeah. This came up earlier, and I think one of the best ways to deal with that is to have a senior mentor, a senior faculty member in the department that can tell you whether or not this is reasonable. And, one of the functions of mentoring is protection. And I've had senior men go to department chairs and say, this isn't fair that you're asking her to do this, and I don't think she should do it. So you have to work on getting into a situation where you can kind of rely on the community to self-police, because that's what it is. It's, fairness is like fundamental. And I think most academic units, once they're faced with an analysis that shows blatant unfairness, will fix it. At least I have to hold on to that. I think if we want to be a self-regulating profession, and we want to say what matters is the quality of your work, and not who you know and who you are and how you were born and what color your skin is, then those things have to be fixed once you see them.
Have we done it? And Anne's not here. I'm just wondering, have we done a survey recently of workload assignment and hours and all of that stuff? Because that would be interesting to do.
It's the same way. I mean, when you do a salary survey and you get salary clearance, you've got to do those every 10 years, because they all float back. I mean, it never stays fixed. So you have to be kind of vigilant about it.
I'm struggling with this because I'm a new program director in family medicine, and our department is heavily female, which is a nice place to be as a woman. But I almost wonder if it's gone like too far. I mean, we've had residency classes that are all women, and I mean, part of what reflects that is I think that there's more women who are now graduating from medical school. But I almost just wonder if that's a bad thing, because sometimes we'll look at our resident cohort and be like, maybe we should like rank some of these men a little bit higher because they're men and diversity.
Yeah.
And it's the same with our faculty as well.
That's why I was talking about the disciplinary distribution is shifting, and medicine's one of the places where it's becoming predominantly female. It's certainly in Canada, it's predominantly female already. And, that has a lot of implications, right? And those patterns are too big to fight. I mean, in the long run.
So I just let it ride.
Oh, I don't know. I think you can make a special effort to recruit men, just the way we make a special effort to recruit women. When the first research project I ever did was a case study, so it was a small group, but it was on academic philosophy, and we recruited we recruited experts to write in their discipline, and we were criticized for not recruiting women. I said, why not? How do we recruit PhD students in philosophy if there are no PhD? This was 25 years ago, so disciplinary distribution makes a big difference. And this is a place where institutions can't do anything about it, right? It's your university can't do anything about, making economics more gender, fair if there are just no economists out there that are women. I mean, economics is shifting. There's different subspecializations, but the hard ones, are predominantly men, just like philosophy. But you can work through your professional organizations, and that is something I think that we can do more of, is that we can ask our disciplinary organizations to be more aware of the factors that influence and support women's promotion in the Professoriate, because they're the ones that do the reviews, they're the ones that put together the programs and control the journals. All of the metrics that are related to advancement are not controlled by the university, they're controlled by your discipline. So if you have disciplinary biases, I really think, especially those of you who are senior, I think you can call attention to it. I think disciplines react well to that. There was a very interesting article that I read a few years ago about it was a subspecialty in biology that studies birds, and a woman wrote the article and said, I have gone to this conference, for the last 10 years, and every year we bemoan the fact that nobody's going into our discipline. And I said, And I said, I am so sick of hearing this because there are no women in this field, and you have this whole, a whole group of people that are systematically excluded because you don't try to recruit them into, And that was like eye-opening for that whole discipline. So I think we can hold our disciplines feet to the fire and expect more from them. Any other comments or questions? I hope I didn't depress you. Actually, there's one relationship between that institutional change. I think one of the reasons that the public's lost faith in us, because the public perceives that the academy is not fair. And I think that if we can make the academy fairer, that will help with the public perception. That if it weren't so insular and and old boys, that it would find better support. So we could be a counter force against that trend. Well, I think there's a reception.
There is.
Any minute now.
I think, Laura, do you have anything to add, or the workshops?
Laura?
Sure, I'm going to self-promote. We have workshops in the spring. I know a lot of you already picked them up, but one of them is actually focused on women specifically and supporting women faculty. So it's a peer network, kind of a group to meet other women from across campus who are in similar career stages as you or have similar identities as you. So you essentially get to pick your career network or your table that you get to sit at depending on where you are. So if you're going up for tenure, if you're new faculty, if you're trying to go up for full, if you're trying to publish a book, and there's various options. You can rank which ones you're interested in, or they're also identity based. So mothers in academia, international faculty, GLBTQ faculty. So just really trying to create networks so you can meet women from across campus and kind of get, broaden your networks, get support, be able to talk about issues when you're in similar positions. Because research shows that peer networking or peer mentoring is actually a very effective form of mentoring. Talking to people who are going through the same challenges as you, and especially as women, you're facing unique challenges such as unconscious bias. So having kind of sounding boards to discuss strategies is hopefully you'll find it useful if you come to that event.
And I just want to put in a plug for remembering that there's going to be 2 more WHAM events this year. One, Dr. Desai is going to be leading on leadership styles, knowing your own and your supervisor's leadership styles. And the other is going to be a brown bag on negotiation skills.
So good.
Sorry, what is WHAM?
Women in Academic Medicine.
Oh, okay.
Do you allow non-medicine people to go?
Yes.
Is the negotiation?
And we allow non-women to come too. They're open to everyone.
Is the negotiation one going to be focused on medical careers, or is it kind of applicable to all faculty?
I think it'll be applicable to all faculty. I'm not leading it, so I'm not exactly sure.
Thank you.
And if everyone can fill out their evaluations, please, that would be great. Cheryl would like to get some feedback, and we want to thank Cheryl for coming and doing marathon sessions today. They were all fabulous, and thank you so much. And yes, we do have a reception of wonderful food from Roma Imports, so please help yourself, and we have some drinks. Yes, well, Italian fare.
We have a million too many handouts.